The Exorcist is what somebody in their 60s thinks of as a valuable horror IP. Five Nights at Freddy's is an actual valuable horror IP. It's too old. It's too old. The entertainment business is too old. The people running the business are too old.
Today, I'm joined by Simon Pullman. Simon is a partner and the co-chair of the media and entertainment practice at the law firm Pryor Cashman. So the reason I invited you on is really not because of your legal experience as much as your spicy takes on games and the movie business and the TV business. And so I've been a fan of your writing for a long time. I think there's a whole bunch of really interesting issues that we can dig into that relate to the future of the media business. So I want to ask you first, what does the entertainment industry not get about the games business? And also, what does the games business not really understand about film and TV?
I do want to caveat this by saying there is an emerging generation of younger people, lawyers, agents, business affairs, actors, directors, right, who did grow up playing games and they understand games. I'm not talking about those people. What I'm talking about is if you go into Beverly Hills and throw a dart, right, and the average person that you hit, what do they not understand about the games business or games? The answer to that is everything. They've never played a game in their life, probably, certainly in the last decade. Maybe their kids play Fortnite and they're sort of vaguely aware of it. They don't understand why people play games. They're not aware of how big the games business is. It's all a complete blind spot for them in general. Most of these people still believe in the traditional primacy and order of things in Hollywood, which is motion picture here, right? That's the foremost form of art that one can be engaged in. Television sort of here, and it's higher than it used to be because of quality, premium streaming series. And then everything else way down below, including gaming, notwithstanding the fact that gaming is a much bigger business. So this leads to things like, I don't know, the Super Mario Brothers movie coming out, and you have headlines in the trade saying, shocker, Super Mario Brothers movie, hit at the box office. Whereas you and I are like, well, of course, it's about the biggest family brand on the planet. The majority of people 40 or under or 45 and under grew up playing those games. They have a strong emotional connection with it. So it's just, it's virtually everything. I think it's improving slowly. As I say, there's a generation of people, coming up. But, we still encounter a lot of sort of cultural differences between the worlds. Now,
so on the first, I'm kind of surprised that it still persists, given, like, if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, like, I would kind of get it. But looking at, like, the crisis, what looks to me anyway, like the crisis in the box office, and just the shifting power dynamics in the industry the last few years, it's sort of surprising to me that hasn't changed a bit faster.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? I mean, everyone is aware that the box office has become driven by IP. Primarily Marvel, obviously, but you also have things like Barbie. But still, I think if you were to ask the average person in Hollywood, they would attribute a lot of success to talent, to individuals, right, as opposed to sort of the brands, and franchises that are underpinning the. Again, there's very little awareness of video games. So we will see probably one of the trades, Hollywood Reporter or Variety, or if not both, do a GTA 6 cover, right? We will see that. But I would imagine that will be the only video game focused cover, for over a 5-year period, because it takes a lot to sort of break through. And so really then it's about the IP, the adaptations. I think a lot of people in Hollywood still view video game IP as it's like a cycle. It's like, okay, we had this period of time, 2 or 3 years. There was Twilight and the Hunger Games, and then, the first Divergent movie, and then the YA fad was kind of over, and we moved on to the next thing, and now we're in the superhero era. So I still think they think of it in that way, as opposed to, no, people spend, dozens of hours within these worlds. They socialize around these worlds. They have a deep emotional connection with these worlds and with this IP. And so this is what they're loyal to as brands. I don't think we're there yet. But people are starting to, they're starting to get there. I don't think we could have had shows like The Last of Us and Fallout a decade ago just because of the sort of the trust in that material just wouldn't have been there in the same way.
Look at you just mentioned two of the best executed games to TV transitions that we've seen. I think in recent memory. What do you think went right in those cases that didn't go right in the case of, say, the Borderlands movie?
Yeah. Well, look, Borderlands is a singular example. A lot went wrong then. It was shot, I believe, during COVID. It sat for a long time. But, my sense a little bit with Borderlands was that they had a first-class problem in a certain respect, insofar as because it was during COVID, and this is pure speculation, I have no first-hand knowledge, but, Cate Blanchett wanted to do something. And so it was suddenly, Cate Blanchett's going to do our movie. Or she wants to bring along Jamie Lee Curtis as well. And now you've got a thing where you've got people 30 years older than those characters playing those characters. When you have A-list stars, it drives up all the cost as well. They had a lot of COVID-related costs. And then in the marketing, it just didn't resonate. They didn't seem to be clear as to what it wanted to be. They didn't lean into the video game aspect. I didn't see them playing that up very much. There is a world where, it could have been successful, perhaps with a lower budget, but because it was something like 130 million, the bar was high for it to succeed. I think with a lot of these adaptations, you saw it recently with the Like a Dragon adaptation as well. Once the fans think this isn't on brand or this isn't going to be good, it's very hard to reverse that course. And that's a challenge that the movie business has in general. Once the narrative starts to swing in a certain way, it's tricky. So as far as what The Last of Us and Fallout did well, I think there's a whole world of things, including involving the creators. Obviously, Neil Druckmann was very involved. Yeah. The Last of Us, they're very different in certain ways. The Last of Us adaptation is the game's very linear. It's a pretty faithful adaptation. Obviously, expanded certain aspects and made slight tweaks. That famous episode 3. But, it sort of was there and it felt authentic. And the same with Fallout. And speaking personally as somebody who is a huge fan of those games and the shows, when I saw the first key art, when I saw the first clips, I was like, that's it. That's the thing that I love. And for the last, it might just have been, the storm sequence in, I think it maybe is Seattle or something, where you see the building and it's like, that's totally on brand. And it's funny because, we at the time we were working with a client, and one of the producers at the client was one of the producers of The Last of Us. I sent her an email and I was like, this, as a big fan of the game, I can't tell you, I just watched the trailer, what this means to me, to see it. So I think that's it, engaging the core audience, but also we've got to give credit to the writers because they managed to do something that brought in people from outside the games as well. People watched The Last of Us who had never played the game and possibly in some instances never heard of the game. Now, in my view, which is very subjective, it's not because they changed things or they tried to find a new audience. It's because The Last of Us is a phenomenal story and they're just bringing it to a new audience. And that's where I differ, I think, from a lot of people because there's a lot of dismissiveness, I think, about game stories. I think games are full of amazing stories and full of amazing worlds. And all you have to do is to bring those worlds and those stories to a broader audience and they will love them. That's my feeling.
So this is sort of quite neatly leads me to my next question, which is what is your most controversial opinion about the entertainment business?
One of them, frankly, is the fact that I think the video game business is going to move into the cultural primacy. I think that's fairly obvious. But, in terms of what I had down in notes here, it's the following. It's too old. It's too old. The entertainment business is too old. The people running the business are too old. The CEOs are all in their 60s and 70s. There's this Bob Iger quote. It was when Disney was announcing the Epic partnership. But he said, when I saw Gen Z and Gen Alpha and even millennials, I saw the amount of time they were spending in terms of their total media screen time on video games. It was stunning to me, equal to what they spend on TV and movies, Iger said. So, okay, there's two ways to look at that. Like one hand, okay, great, you get it now. That's why you're investing in these things. I think we'll see a Kingdom Hearts, movie eventually. I think this, we'll do more of this. There was even a report in the last week, they're looking at the CEO of EA as the successor to Iger. But how on earth can it be stunning to you that people spend a lot of time playing video games? This is a colossal business with the most engaged fans on the planet. That is an incredibly worrying statement to me. And so that's my controversial view, is that there are so many mechanics now, very hard for people to break through from being mid-level executives, to being the top agents, being the top execs at the studios. That's I think the challenge that the film and television business has.
One of the things that's interesting about the games business is because it's so adjacent. It's so adjacent to the tech business in many ways. The technology is continually evolving, and we're kind of constantly reinventing distribution and like the form factor of what we make in many ways. And that's probably less true of the entertainment industry broadly. And, obviously the rise of streaming, but that was really a sort of disruption from outside. And I'm curious if there are companies and approaches from the entertainment business that are innovative or interesting, or that people should be paying closer attention to.
You're right. Film and television is a hard thing to innovate in because of the nature of the form factor. I just wish that Hollywood would really invest more in young talent and young stars, because with the whole, AI thing over the hill, coming and so on, my personal view is that Hollywood should be grounding itself in real people and real stories as much as possible. And if it starts getting drawn into AI and virtual sort of spaces and virtual worlds, we'll lose to gaming, right? If we're talking about like synthetic worlds that are created, synthetic performers, games companies are far more sophisticated at doing that kind of thing than Hollywood is. And I think they will surrender further ground to the games business if they do that.
You've brought up the two letters that everyone eventually circles back to. So I'd like to dig into AI a little bit. What are you actually seeing on the ground in the real world, as far as what are people really going to do with this? Where do you think we net out with AI as it relates to the sort of film and TV business?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you from a professional standpoint, contractually, mostly what we see is people trying to say no AI. So talent rep saying, in capital letters, handwritten down the side, no AI, or at least having sort of guardrails around it, because it's in such flux, at the moment. There's a lot of talk theoretically, right? Like, I'm going to be able to license my likeness and I'll be able to appear in ads and do endorsements for things when I'm not there. I'm not quite sure to what extent the audience is going to accept that. Clearly, the copyright issue is, it's very sort of muddy at the moment, and we have all of these sort of right of publicity type statutes. But the answer is not huge. I'm not seeing a huge amount on the ground, other than people wanting to protect for it. We don't know the details of these sort of internal trading deals. Really, they've been reported on in the press. It's this idea of having these internal models, for efficiencies. It'll presumably be applied to things like logistics, scheduling, and so on, and then also things like visual effects. At first, I'm pretty bearish on the notion of wholly generated AI, content. Everything you see, it just looks immediately like AI presently. And will it but I think that there's a lot of excitement, a lot of interest, but right now it's too early to judge how, as a practical matter, it's actually being implemented.
Yeah. So circling back around to the games industry perspective, and you're right, we didn't quite get to the other side of the first question I asked you, which is, what does the games business not understand about film and TV, and beyond the cultural differences like the Hollywood no and things like this? So what do you think it's helpful for game companies to understand better as they think about the role of film and TV for their properties?
I've seen a lot of smart people, extremely smart and successful people, come from tech, come from gaming, come from other businesses that they've sort of succeeded and prevailed in. And I want to be kind here, but they're just absolutely eaten alive. And, a lot of people in Hollywood are skeptical, of people coming from outside, and they also will do their job, which is to extract money from. So if you're a big games company and you've sold all of these units, for example, very often the reaction is, great, like, pay me money. So you see very often tech companies and brands and so forth, hiring writers to come up with things and paying them, hundreds of thousands of dollars without necessarily knowing this is the intricacies of how deals are done, and often not getting very much for their money. Concepts like pay or play, right, which isn't sort of understood. And so, you hit a statement somebody said to me last week. Yeah, it's not rocket science, and that's accurate. Like it's not in a certain sense, but it's so idiosyncratic in how things are done that you just have to be very, very cautious about it. And it goes on both sides, and I think that it's about establishing trust. It's about making sure you're working with people who can be conduits between the worlds. And just, one more thing, the pace. Entertainment deal making and those kind of things are slow. So very often, a games company or a tech company will come in and say, let's just, here's our best offer. Let's not waste time. And you have to understand the gut reaction of a talent lawyer. It's like, you offered me $1 million. All right, I want $5 million. And the games company scratches their heads like, no, we told you that's our best. And you have to understand, my job, like, this is what I do. So you can never cut to the chase. You can never go out with your best, very, very, very rarely. And I've heard this firsthand from games companies. In these deals to like integrate talent and integrate brands into games, going the other way, and they'll make an offer and then they get back this incredible counter, and the games company just walks away because clearly, the Hollywood company, it's going to be impossible to make a deal. No, they're testing you. They're seeing how much you have in that piggyback, so they can make sure they're getting as much as possible from you. So it's just, there's a whole world of cultural differences.
So on the subject of money, this is a pretty tough time in both the film and TV business, as well as the games business. And I think there's the other reason for that is fairly straightforward. Well, maybe not straightforward, but there are some commonalities, which are one of the things that drove the oversupply was a lot of money, too much money, flowed into both industries over particularly the sort of 2021 period, but when interest rates were super low. And then also you had certain companies in real growth mode, and so they were commissioning probably more content than they needed. And now we're in a kind of retrenchment. And so one, a phrase that keeps floating around, it's going to be out of date quite soon, is to survive till 2025, which I'm not a huge fan of the phrase because I don't think it tells you all that much. So I'm curious what you think the new normal is going to look like and when it's going to arrive.
Yeah, I mean, we probably need like a new snappy phrase, something that rhymes with 26.
Yeah.
But so look, I think you have to look at these a little bit differently per industry. There was in film and television, a huge amount of buying in the peak TV era as everyone looked to catch up with and compete with Netflix. I think that the guild strikes were like pouring freezing cold water over the business, and I think there was an overcorrection. And I think we will see an uptick, in buying, not to sort of 2018 levels per se, but I think we'll see an uptick, for sure that this sort of has to be in games. I was reading.
Do you think the industry, the writers and actors specifically, are better off having had the strike versus not?
Maybe this is my most controversial entertainment in industry opinion. I think it's categorically not. On average, yeah. They are way, way worse for having had the strikes, for the lost income during the duration of the strikes, for the fact that they allowed the companies to go back and re-examine the books and how much they were buying and look at their metrics. Do we need this much content to maintain subscribers? But they killed the momentum.
Versus just re-licensing Suits and sticking that on,
which has worked very, very well. And so they got certain gains. I think the AI protections were probably helpful. They got, obviously increases to minimums, but things like, the minimum staffing. So in television, you've got to have, X number of people in the writer's room. Well, it was, I think, obvious to everyone at the time that the reaction to that was going to be, okay, then we'll make fewer shows. And that's what's happened. So I would imagine that in the aggregate, there are fewer people employed. Now, there are other things going on because, one of the rest of my answers as to what the things will look like. Obviously, there's a huge growth in international in film and television from territories in Europe, Asia, etc. And, the part of the problem is, guilds aside, it's much less expensive to go and shoot in Eastern Europe, for example, than it is to shoot in Los Angeles. The Strangers movie, not that I necessarily recommend watching The Strangers Chapter 1, but they shot 3 back-to-back movies in Eastern Europe, doubling for, I think it was, Washington State maybe, or something, so it's set in the US, but shot in Europe. And if you pay attention, you can see it. But the reason was because it was a lot less expensive. So there are bigger issues there. It's very harsh because they were very fired up. It was their thinking, seemed to be very binary. You're big tech companies. You've got lots of money. Give us money, effectively. But obviously it's more complex than that, whether long-term, because each contract's 3 years. So will they strike again? I think that's quite unlikely. Will they be ultimately, will it pick up in such a manner that the gains are worth it? Maybe. But right now, I think that it's fairly dire straits for a lot of creatives, unfortunately. And, obviously what the strikes brought with them and the reduction in production is massive, massive, massive damage to the lives of other people involved in the industry in Los Angeles. Vendors, people who are caterers, people who have facilities, everyone below the line, VFX, just brutal for those people.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. So Simon, let's say I took away your law license and I basically held a gun to your head and forced you to start a business. It could be in games or in film and TV. What would you do?
This is the most difficult question I think I've ever been asked, because the truth of the matter is, I love what I do. I honestly, if I didn't have my law license, I would probably do something very similar in a business affairs type of capacity at this sort of intersection. If you were to ask me which of the two industries I would go into, I think the answer would have to be gaming, because I think gaming's a growth industry. And I'm not sure film and television are. I'm not cynical enough to say start an AI company. I think something probably at the intersection of brand building and, international IP perhaps, but it's hard because I have a very specific set of knowledge and skills,
you have a very particular set of skills.
Useless without them. Exactly. I have a very particular set of skills. Right. But unlike Liam Neeson, mine are much less useful and very limited to a very specific set of circumstances.
So then maybe I'll ask you in a slightly different way, which is in terms of sort of trends, concepts, categories, things you're seeing.
Yeah.
What are your, over the next 3 to 5 years, what are you buying and what are you selling?
Yeah. So the first sort of big concept, there's a very broad one, but this is clearly a trend, is multitasking, right? So the notion that you are going to have exclusive attention of your audience, it is a fool's errand for most of the time, unless you have them perhaps maybe in like a blacked out movie theater, and they're even then, right? Increasingly Gen Z is on their phone or doing something else. They are going to be doing 2 things at once. They're going to be watching TV and playing a game, or they're going to be watching TV or a movie and scrolling through TikTok, or they're going to be playing a game and listening to a podcast. And so I would say anything at that intersection. And so, that means that sort of potentially deliberately developing content that's designed for multitask to an extent, or as a companion. And I'm not talking about these, 10 years ago, there were all of these social TV apps, right? While you're watching the show. I'm not talking about that because it's literally divided attention. But that's why, in gaming, I'm, and this is so incredibly obvious, but I'm very bullish on handheld gaming. Obviously, Switch was a masterstroke. Steam Deck might be, frankly, the most important device to come out in the last decade. So incredibly smart, in terms of pushing Steam. I personally use my PlayStation Portal all the time. And people were, a lot of naysayers. Why would you want that? Well, you would want it if you want to be sat upstairs in your living room and having a TV show or being, so handheld. What else? I think any kind of content that it can be done at a manageable budget that has a very specific audience in mind, and which, particularly in gaming, perhaps is a smaller game, shorter, more focused, because there is clearly AAA has been a race to massive budget. We need therefore a massive audience. It's a game for everything and everyone, and it leads to I think a diluted experience. It's very competitive in that marketplace. It leads to weird design decisions like characters telling you what to do every moment. Well, yeah, because you don't want to alienate those players. But I think the same in film and television. Every time there's a success, people point to it and be like, this is the way. Well, no, it's usually a singular thing. But if you look at the development of something like Terrifier, right? Incredibly low budget, but built fandom over time, very targeted in a genre, horror, that is known, for having very loyal, dedicated audience.
I think one thing I took away from Terrifier is that I thought was really, really interesting is if you're going to choose between having amazing IP and amazing distribution, ownership of distribution is ultimately probably more valuable. It's the sort of the secret. I think Terrifier, yes, there's a sort of singular. It's doing a very specific thing for an audience, and it's doing that very well in an uncompromising way. I thought the decision to go unrated and still managing to crowbar their way in to thousands of screens, I thought was really, really fascinating. But the point that I didn't really appreciate until I listened to the CEO of Cineverse, they also owned a whole bunch of online. They owned Bloody Disgusting and a whole bunch of other properties that allowed them to really push that to the right audience. And I think the value of that cannot be overstated, probably.
Well, distribution, but also windowing. And this is one of the other huge dilemmas for the film and television business, because historically, a lot of things have found audiences through various windows, right? When they're on cable TV, The Shawshank Redemption being played, 5 times a day, on DVD in the old days. And now with Terrifier, I mean, that built that audience over time. It started, I think, in like the horror film festivals and had a little bit of theatrical release, but people found it, and it slowly built that fandom. And, when you move through different windows, firstly, you can monetize, but secondly, you can maybe pick up fandom, audience members in those windows. Whereas, as great as Netflix is, if you have a Netflix original movie, it's there for 10 days. I mean, someone described it recently as like having a viral video. It's there on your top 10, it drops out, it disappears. And I don't think that the algorithm, quote unquote, is anywhere near as powerful as a discovery tool as literally just being available periodically on different platforms, and popping up in people and having them, try it. But I think, and look, that gets to a bigger issue, which is right across media, which is discovery, in terms of other things I'm buying, Asian developed games. I think that a ton of the games.
But actually, before we move off that, because I think that you touched on a couple of things that I'd like to dig into a bit more on the sort of the windowing. I think on the windowing and the sort of Netflix. What is interesting to me is that there are two things that are actually true. One is that Netflix can make certain things a hit that would not be a hit on other platforms because of their scale. So they can take something like a Tiger King and make it
Squid Game.
Or Squid Game, absolutely. They can make make something part of the sort of cultural zeitgeist and universal in a way that like no competitor of theirs can. At the same time, you touched on something which is on the face of it you would think then, that being true, well, movies that go onto Netflix, Netflix's original movies should be this should also be these huge cultural moments. Actually, you're right. Often the reverse is true, and so I'm curious to sort of unpick why is, in one way, Netflix's ability to take things that are kind of would otherwise be sort of niche or undiscovered and make them a thing, such a huge advantage in one
Yeah.
sense, but why is it not translating for movies? And
You're hitting on my greatest hits of controversial entertainment opinions, David, because one thing I say frequently is streaming movies are not real movies in the mind of the audience. Streaming movies are not real movies in the mind of the audience. A theatrical movie is a real movie, whether that's, Top Gun, whether that's any of the recent sort of rom-com surprise successes that we've seen, the Glenn Powell, Sydney Sweeney one. And, it's, whereas, by contrast, I can't think of a single Netflix original movie that sort of stayed in the zeitgeist or had that kind of cultural impact. And, I think it's a few things. It's just audience perception. I think audiences do correlate streaming movies to straight to DVD movies, like, or made for TV movies on Hallmark or whatever else. And look, some of them are just rom-coms, that don't really do very much, original and really great to watch on a Friday night, but you don't want to think of it. But, even rom-coms, there are plenty of rom-coms that have hit, entered the zeitgeist. Pretty Woman, Notting Hill. There are tons of them. And they've done that because they went through windows. They were released theatrically. They got the promotion that theatrical movies get. They get the real treatment of being, a real thing. Then they arrive, nowadays it's on PVOD, but would be sort of, home video DVD, right? So the old days when you would go and you would pick something from Blockbuster. And look, when I was a kid, I picked out plenty of things from the video shop, which I hadn't heard of. And you can still do that. But for sure, if there was something you wanted to see in theaters and you weren't able to, that's usually your first pick. And they have established stars. And so you go through these things and then you would sometimes find it on television. And it's just one of those things. They're not real movies. I can't, rationalize or explain it any more than that. It's just a perception thing in the mind of the audience. But the question, David, is, does Netflix care? And I would say for its core business, they don't, because all they care about is you watching it. Now, I would argue that television is a better investment for them, especially on the high end. There's no reason for Netflix to be making a $300 million movie like Rebel Moon or The Gray Man, because an hour and a half watched or 2 hours watched is 2 hours watched, whether it's a reality television show budget or a $300 million movie budget, right? But as long as they're on the platform, they don't care. Where they might start to care is when they forge into other areas. Games, location-based entertainment, merchandising, those kind of things. Because you cannot, they're doing this Narnia movie, and there's a lot of discussion about maybe the Narnia movie will be released on IMAX. They'll come up with some compromise, because that movie, if it drops only on Netflix, it'll be watched by a lot of people between Christmas and New Year's or whenever it is, and then it will disappear. It will disappear. Whereas if it goes theatrically and it feels like a real event, it will have secondary value. But this gets to the other point, which I think Netflix should be licensing its older stuff off platform as well. I think that the value of the Netflix catalog would be enhanced if it A, released its movies theatrically, and B, let them live after a while or for a limited window elsewhere and then come back.
Interesting. Leads me to, you would, I think, on the edge of talking about Netflix's games strategy, which I think is, to many in the games business, is one of the kind of enduring mysteries over the last couple of years. And so I'm curious, A, what do you think their strategy is? And B, what do you think it should be?
So it's really difficult. So look, the threshold question here is, I think, why is Netflix in the games business? Why is it? And I think probably primarily it goes back to that old quote from probably, Reed Hastings or Ted Sarandos saying, our competition isn't HBO, our competition is Fortnite, right? It's this fear of, well, we're in the subscription business, but we're also in the attention business.
I think Reed Hastings has also said something quite similar, I believe.
Yeah. So the notion being that we and therefore we need to have the attention of these people. I think there's a secondary reason probably, which is finding other ways to drive value now that, traditional film and television driven subs are starting to slow down in certain territories, right? You have a certain cap in the US. So that's why they've been going into other territories like, into potentially India and growing in other spaces, but also finding other means of revenue. That's why the ad supported business came around. That's why we have location-based entertainment, the Netflix House, which is coming out. That's why we have some limited merchandising programs. So those, I think, are the goals. Now, I think it's really challenging. I candidly don't know what their strategy is. I do not know. I don't have first-hand knowledge, but also it's not clear on its face, I think, to anybody. I can tell you what sort of my personal experience as a consumer. I've been a Netflix, subscriber for probably well over a decade, probably 20 years at this point in time, right? Going back to the DVD, things. I have downloaded, I think, about 3 games. I don't think I've played any of them. I don't think that anybody is going to ever want to play a game on without having a real controller in terms of like a AAA type thing. So there's obviously a question as well, what kinds of games do they want to be in there? I just don't know. But in terms of what I would do, this is like, again, another controversial opinion. So they have to make a decision. Do they really want to be in the games space? And if they do, I think they have to accept it's going to take an investment similar to their investment in content, in film television, meaning billions of dollars. They have to accept that it's going to take some swings and some misses and some big failures in order to find those hits. I think that they have to pay for exclusive games because, notwithstanding anything else, I do agree with people who state that exclusivity is still the biggest driver of console purchases, of time spent, and they've got to really decide to compete. That they've got to send controllers to everybody. Maybe they've got to make a console. They've got to do all those things if they want to be in that, at minimum, their own version of the Steam Deck. That makes a lot of sense, right? Except instead of the Steam Deck iOS, operating system, it's Netflix. But then the question becomes, why would you do that? Because what I would do, therefore, probably is say, actually, no, we can't win in this space. We can't compete. It's different. When you are competing with HBO and the other incumbents at the time, you had the cable subscriptions, you had HBO, it's less sticky, but you don't have the same thing we have in games, which is library, right? So I have a library on Steam that goes back maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. I have a library on PlayStation that probably goes back 15 years. I have hundreds of games. I have my trophies. I have my gamers, people have their friends lists, all of those kinds of things. So it's much harder to move people. Netflix is going to find it difficult or impossible to move people from Steam or from PlayStation or from Xbox. It's going to be almost impossible. So therefore, what do you do? Well, I think you're more strategic. You become the home of video game IP in entertainment, right? You make deals that are really creator friendly with IP, with IP owners. You look to do great authentic adaptations. You look to bring the gaming audience into the ecosystem via that, not because they're playing games, but because, as you know, David, that again, I don't think that the entertainment business necessarily knows. Gamers spend a huge amount of time thinking, talking, and gathering around games, whether it's forums, whether it's social media, whether it's watching things on Twitch or on YouTube, podcasts. So that's it. You become a cultural home of games rather than necessarily a platform. Then the other thing you do is, if you want to be in the franchise building game, perhaps you take your Netflix originals and you make more deals off platform to license them. You get a really great console Stranger Things game, or maybe you do a mobile Squid game or whatever else. Because again, like right now, it's you have to go to the app, right? I think, and then you click on the thing, and then you still have to download the game to the app as a separate thing. Why would you do that if you have an Apple phone and there are thousands of free games in Apple Arcade? Why would you do that? I just don't think it's possible as a winning proposition. But look, here's the thing: you are much more experienced in games than me. So, and at the start of this podcast, you said you have the easy job because you have to ask the questions. Well, I'm flipping on you because I want to ask you the question. Like, what do you think? Because I don't really know. I'm so tangential to this. And this is just sort of superficial observation. I'd love to know what you think.
It's a really difficult one because there's so many different... They have so many interesting assets. The way I think about it is you have IP, and as you say, like, there's a strong argument. Like, you think about the most, in some ways, like if I just think about like where what would be the way to invest the least money and get the most money back out, it's probably a licensing strategy, right? And like that's been really Hasbro, for example, right? If you find the right developer for the right IP, you can make a lot of money, and it's very, very high margin business to be in. But it's clear that they have ambitions that are, you know, a lot broader than that, and they have some interesting assets. They have distribution in a sense, as you say. They have all of this footprint across everything from smart TVs to iOS to you name it. They have an app somewhere, and then I think that the challenge becomes, as I think you've alluded to, is okay. Well, what behavior are you trying to push here? Because it's, even if you are biggest company, you know, some of the biggest companies in the world, you know, we've just watched, you know, look at Apple's experience with the Vision Pro, right? It's extremely hard to create a new consumer behavior, and it's very.
It wasn't right 10 years ago. It wasn't right 20.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've been hearing every 10 years, and I think, yeah, I'll share my opinions on VR AR in a minute if we want to go there, but so I think it's really hard. I think, you know, the obvious thing people were thinking was like, well, you could do cloud. They've got all this cloud infrastructure. You could, as you say, ship everyone a controller and let them stream games and play games through their TV. But again, you know, you got to also think, what behaviors are you sort of competing with, right? What alternative? And I think that's the other thing, right? That you always, as you say, people have infinite things they could do with their time, and they're always going to do the thing that is the best return on their effort, their best sort of entertainment return on their effort. And, you know, it's so figuring out a way to do this in a way that's low friction is really, really hard. So I've just given you a complete non-answer, but I think like my inclination is to honestly, I think
it's sort of like, well, okay, if I'm going to play a mobile game, I'll play it on my phone or maybe on my Steam Deck. If I'm going to play, you know, a console type game, I'll play it on my console.
I think it's people, again, it comes down to this sort of stuff that's in between, that's in sort of new behavior, right? People know what a TV show is, they know how to consume it, they'll still understand what games are, and certain people will never pick up a controller and they don't understand that platform at all, but they might understand, you know, how to play games on their iPhone. But, you know, as soon as you start getting into these things that are neither here nor there, you sort of like, you end up with something that doesn't appeal to the sum of those audiences. It falls in between those audiences entirely. But we'll see. They have a lot of interesting assets, and there's a lot of smart people there. So I think I'm certainly not counting them out in terms of their game's ambitions yet by a long stretch.
Other things that I'd be buying would be Asian developed games. I think both South Korea and China are getting more and more proficient in that area. Some of my favorite games of the last couple of years have come out of South Korea. China looks like it has some very exciting things, especially in third person sort of action, Souls-like type space. So that for sure. In film and television, I'm buying and doubling down on game IP and game adaptations. Quite obviously, would you expect me to say anything else? And then there are other sort of perhaps more niche things. You know, I've been calling for a while, Colleen Hoover in film and television, and Sarah Maas, these sort of female-focused literary adaptations. Female audience is hugely undervalued. And I think that there need to be more things that sort of catering to them. And again, it's a strong fandom and fans who are really devoted, and they will show up. And I think, you know, fandom in general is sort of probably not well enough understood or appreciated.
I agree with you. And on that point, I'm quite taken with this idea of the rise of community-driven IP. And by that, I mean fandom-driven in the sense that the IP is actually, there's a lot of creation happening in the fan community. And so we've seen a lot of this in entirely sort of bottoms up IPs such as SCP. We've backed a company that's building a game, and certainly not the first game in the universe of SCP, but probably the first that's been created sort of in collaboration with a number of creators, you know, in that community. And also, I think community creation played a big role in the success of Five Nights at Freddy's. Clearly, both in terms of the game and then the sort of surprising to some success of the movie. So I'm curious if you agree that that's something we're going to see more of in the coming decade.
This is a yes with an if or no with a but answer, insofar as it's not bright line, because so look, first and foremost, community is absolutely critical. It is, to me, perhaps the single most important factor, and we see it time and again. If you can engage a community, they will evangelize, they will show up, they will spend money. As to, you know, for community creation, the answer is maybe. and I am going to put my attorney hat on here. As far as things that are just built from scratch, the challenge around that from a rights perspective is, let's say, for instance, we have something that's co-created and people are adding things and iterating on it and remixing and doing all those kinds of pieces. Huge amount of engagement, huge amount, growing audience. You can perhaps monetize around it in terms of data and in terms of advertising and those kinds of things. From an IP perspective, very difficult because, okay, this thing reaches a critical mass. Now we want to take this and we want to make a TV show. We want to do a merchandising and licensing program. We want to do a sort of console video game in and around that world. Who owns the IP and who participates in it? And I've done some things, professionally in and around this space, and it gets quite complex. Some people have these very, very superficial ideas of put it on the blockchain, use the blockchain, and then you'll be paid automatically. Well, there are various reasons why that doesn't necessarily work. So you have to work out a solution to it. Some games companies allow modders to own their mods, right? And in some instances, we've even seen scenarios where I played an absolutely fabulous game that was based, I think, on a Skyrim mod, The Forgotten City, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I think we'll see things, but we're also going to see disputes. We're going to see scenarios where people go and things are monetized and people didn't realize what they were agreeing to pursuant to terms and services, terms and conditions, we thought this was jointly owned. One person says they own it. So that's the legal impediment to it. And you're absolutely right about Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's is an incredible thing because that was people forget day and date on Peacock, day and date. So you could watch it at home, and yet it made over $80 million opening weekend. Why? Because it was authentic to the brand and because it has a fandom that has been built up. One guy, right? One guy built those games, but it built up this community. It's very, very active. It's very participatory. All of those kinds of there's all this lore, people talking about the lore and everything else. It's amazing. You get on these rabbit holes. But that, I think, was blindsided a lot of people. And, one thing I often say about that era, that sort of year, is there were two movies Universal put out that year in the horror space. The Exorcist and Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's, I think, made double the money of The Exorcist. And to me, The Exorcist is what somebody in their 60s thinks of as a valuable horror IP. Five Nights at Freddy's is an actual valuable horror IP.
I feel bad for the boomers. They're getting a real shellacking in this.
It's fine. Look, they've got all the country's money.
They have all the money. Yeah, I think that's fine. So switching gears a bit to more practical matters, what avoidable thing do you most often see that makes either kills deals or makes them harder to get done?
One thing that we see a lot when we're working between the film and television business and the gaming business is just process. Because in the film business, very often TV business, we will do deals by email. So we will negotiate material terms, usually by email, sometimes some kind of short form term sheet. And once those terms are agreed, that's under California law and industry practice, that's a contract. So if you agree to the money, if you agree to the terms, the rights granted, the approval rights, those kinds of material things, that's a deal. And so that's a little bit different from the tech world and the gaming world, where often I think things are dealt with in a long form more often. So what will happen very often is a games company, the movie studio will think we've got a deal. And then, but the deal might have been negotiated by a non-lawyer at the games company. And now it goes to legal. And legal has a whole world of additional additional questions. So, and comments. And so, so basically from the outset, it's important to understand the process. And I would say bring in all of the stakeholders. If you're being cynical, there's a world where you would not bring in the lawyers precisely because you want them to be able to reopen things down the line. But let's imagine we're acting to them more in good faith. On the Hollywood side of things, there will always be an agent and an attorney on the call, right? Or there'll be a business affairs person who is a lawyer. Sometimes, if it's talent, there'll be agent, attorney, and manager. So you should therefore have your business people and the attorneys on the call, because it's really great.
Right, final deal-making question. What should IP holders from the games industry not negotiate on, and what should they?
My personal view is, look, money is important, but what's really important are the rights. And that's the rights that you're granting, and therefore the rights that you're reserving. But it's also, I think, reversion, which is, when the rights come back. If there's one movie and it fails, if they never make the movie. And that's where I think games companies in the past, I know this, I've heard this firsthand, have been burned. They've given rights, they can't get them back. And this is, again, this is not a standard entertainment industry position. I don't believe that any games company should ever be giving its IP to a movie studio or TV studio in perpetuity. If you keep making the show, great. You can keep doing it. If you make a movie one and you make another movie within a period of time, great. But if you make one film and that's it, and now our rights are sitting in your quote unquote catalog, or your book value of your conglomerate, no, that's just not appropriate for, again, things that have meaning to the audience already. They're successful on their own merits very, very often. It just doesn't make any sense. But the thing about it is, again, I was on a panel last week with somebody, very different context. But what they were saying is they've had situations with their clients where the clients didn't even know the rights that they granted, and that's really not good. So your IP is your lifeblood. I think that's the thing. And then look, the last little thing: participation in success. You need to have some sense as to what you're going to get if this thing is made and if it succeeds, what you can get. And also understand the process as to how you get it, right? You have a show that runs 8 seasons, you're going to have to audit the TV studio. That's the way Hollywood works. If something's successful, you're going to have to audit. And I would say, the last thing, which is more of a general thing, is always a good question. Why are we doing this? There's been a lot of dialogue I've seen in the last week or so about Arcane. People arguing about, is Arcane successful? And only Riot really knows that. But there's a question as to, why we're doing this. Is it about driving people back to the games? Is it a moneymaker in and of itself? Do you have aspirations to grow your entertainment footprint to naturally produce things? Right? Why are we doing it?
Yeah, I feel like that's a question that just generally does not get asked enough in all sorts of parts of the business. Well, I want to thank you, Simon, for, I think, a really interesting conversation. Where can people find you?
Just add me on LinkedIn. So look, I'm on the firm website. You can find me on there with my, and LinkedIn is probably the best place for sort of industry and professional things. I post far too much there, not all of which will be of value, but occasionally there may be some nuggets.
I can definitely attest to that, the value. Well, thanks again, Simon, and really appreciate the time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dave.